Diego Velazquez spent most of his life painting at the court and palace of Philip IV of Spain. I mean, we tend to pronounce it as Velazquez, don't we? And but I think it's technically, for Spanish-speaking people, it should be pronounced Velazquez. So you get. I'll probably slip from one to the other. Anyway, the court of Philip IV of Spain, who was not only his patron but became his friend, to the extent that he would allow no other artist to paint his royal portrait. This is a context within which we must view Velazquez. Quietly ambitious, he had the ear of the most powerful monarch in Europe, probably in the world. He advanced steadily through the hierarchy of the court and did the king's bidding in Europe, particularly in Italy. Velazquez was born in Seville in 1599, the first child of Juan Rodriguez de Silva, who was a notary or a lawyer, and Hieronima Velazquez. Now you can see from that he took his name from his mother, but that wasn't unusual apparently in those days in Spain. I don't think there was anything comparable in the English-speaking world. Showing early promise as a painter, he was apprenticed to Francesco Pacheco, the premier artist in Seville. In Pacheco's studio, Velazquez was trained in the classic style of the day. On finishing his apprenticeship in 1617, he passed out as a master painter, and in the following year married Pacheco's daughter, Juana. She was 19. They had two daughters, the second of whom died in infancy. Velazquez's earliest works are called bodegas. Now these are paintings usually in domestic surroundings or taverns, which display an arrangement of objects like utensils or other household objects set in a kitchen. In other words, they were basically still lifes, except that they incorporated the figures who used them. He was perhaps the first Spanish artist to display a realistic portrayal of workaday life, like this one captured here, an old woman poaching eggs. Quite an unusual subject for a painting. And you can see there's a very stark contrast between the background and the figures who were strongly lit. Of course, we come across this again and again, this chiaroscuro, Caravaggio type style. So there she is, and the utensils on the table, you can see them all lined up, brilliantly painted, lustrous, the copper and the bronze. I don't know what they are, but there we are. And she looks quite a formidable lady, doesn't she? This is another bodega, musical trio, which you'll find in Berlin. And remember, these are early paintings of Velazquez, so they're possibly a bit naive, one might say. And again, we've got the dark background and the brightly lit figures, the trio, the musical trio, playing guitar. One's playing a guitar and the other's got a very small violin, or maybe it's a fiddle. And then we've got the happy face of the youngster looking out at us, while the other two are singing. Two other bodeguns painted in the same year are kitchen scene with Christ in the house of Martha. And I'll quickly go on to the other one, and I'll come back to this one in a minute. Is kitchen scene with Christ at Emmaus. Now then, you can see what's going on here. At the foreground, we've got the still life on the table again, the meal being prepared. I think that is the same woman on the left there that was boiling the eggs. It's very similar features to me. And then the young maid servant is under instruction with her mortar and pestle there. But what differentiates these, of course, is this tableau on the right, this religious, it's not a painting, it's not a window, it's just there basically. And it's difficult to see what Velazquez is intending by it, but he does it again in this next one, where again we've got a very typical workaday kitchen scene with various pots and jugs akimbo, one's upside down there, mortar and pestle on the left, and then this religious scene. And as again, it is framed, but it's not actually a window, and I don't think it's a picture. It's just been interposed in the corner there, and this represents the scene or the episode, if that's the right word, when Christ appeared to the two strangers on the road to Emmaus. So each is typical of a contemporary trend in that the main focus of the painting is subjugated to the background. More often than not, it's a religious scene, as I said, possibly a painting on a wall or as if seen through a window. The juxtaposition of foreground and background is deliberate, if a little confusing. What does Velazquez intend? Notice how he uses dark browns against which the subject matter is highlighted, similar to Caravaggio's followers known as the Tenebrists because of their fondness for chiaroscuro. The Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, painted in 1619, now this painting can be compared to its advantage with a similar but traditional painting by his tutor Pacheco. It's the same pose, but Velazquez seems to have used the face of a local peasant girl to achieve realism, whereas Pacheco's painting is far more idealized, and the face is far more idealized and fits in well with the religious iconography of the time. So Pacheco's, he surrounded his Virgin with cherubs, seraphim, these curious figures that are just basically heads and wings. And we've got this figure in the bottom left-hand corner who could be the person who commissioned the work. It could be a portrait. And on the other hand, on the left, we got Velazquez's version of it, which is far more individualist. I think you would agree. I don't know which you prefer, but I certainly prefer Velazquez's version, I think. The Adoration of the Kings, this is many of Velazquez's paintings, not surprisingly, are in the Prado. This was painted at the same time. It's another religious painting, but more ambitiously composed. Most of Velazquez's paintings with religious themes are from his early years. He was barely 20 when he painted these, as you can see. So this is fairly traditional. See, and again, we've got the dark background and we've got the superlit figures in the foreground, and the Magi on the left there, and the Christ-like figures almost doll-like, I think. But considering Velazquez is very immature as a painter, only 20 years old, it's quite a startling painting, and it's quite a large painting as well. It's 60 inches, which is 6 foot. It's over 6 foot by 4 foot, so it's a very ambitious painting. This one is called the Water Cellar of Seville, and this actual painting is in, as you can see, is in Apsley House, London, the Duke of Wellington's residence, and very close to Hyde Park Corner. I'm sure many of you have been there and seen whether you notice this painting or not is another thing, of course. So he's moving away a little bit from we've still got the kitchen utensils there, but and we've still got the stark use of light and shade. but he's tending to move away from the bodygun format. And actually, he painted 3 versions of these. He also painted this one, which is in the Uffizi in Florence. And you'll see, quite obviously, the biggest difference is the fact that the water cellar is hatted. He's decided to put a hat on the head of the water cellar. Apart from that, it's pretty much the same, except you could also say that the figure in the middle is far more brightly painted. The one on the left, you can hardly see him at all. He's just sketched in, really. I think they're quite fine paintings. I love the colour of the coat and the ragged version of it. I mean, obviously this is a poor man if all he's got to sell is water, although we can bear in mind, of course, it's hot in Spain on occasions. But we see a new tendency to distribute light more evenly in the Francescian Nun, painted in the following year. He's very good on faces, as we shall see, Velazquez. I mean, this lady has got a very determined look on her face. I wouldn't want to cross her too many times, I don't think. If she said the moon was made of cheese, I think I would agree with her. At the bottom of the painting, a caption reads, "This is the true portrait of Madre Donna Hieronima de la Fuente, foundress and first abbess of the convent of Star." So there's more. It's not, the background is a little lighter here now, although it's obviously because she's got this dark cape and this religious vestment on. She's inevitably dark, apart from the white underneath the headdress. Even so, there is definitely a tendency towards less somber colours, I think. In 1622, the king's court painter died, and Velazquez received a summons to come to court. A portrait of the king was commissioned, and on August the 30th, 1623, and he was only 24 years old at the time, Philip IV sat for Velazquez for the first of many times. Philip had only just succeeded to the throne. So this is the first portrait Velazquez did of Philip IV. And you'll see that Philip has got the typical Habsburg features, the long face, the thick lips, the heavy eyelids, and most I'm going to say most pronounced, but the chin, the pronounced chin, of course, very typical of the Habsburg men, and it has to be said a result of inbreeding, because notoriously the Habsburg dynasty bred within themselves, within the family. They didn't like going outside of the family to create their heirs. Not always a good idea. Anybody who breeds animals would know that. So anyway, the portrait pleased the king, and Velazquez was ordered to move to Madrid with the promise that no other painter would ever paint Philip's portrait, and that all earlier portraits of the king would be withdrawn from circulation. In the following year, Velazquez received 300 ducats from the king to pay the cost of moving his family to Madrid, where he remained for the rest of his life. The king would often visit his studio to watch him paint, and so a friendship blossomed. In 1628, he was commanded as part of his job to chaperone Rubens, who had arrived at court on a diplomatic mission. They went together to the Escorial Palace to study the Titians. We're told Velazquez was in awe of his great reputation. In the same year, he painted the Triumph of Bacchus, this painting is also known as The Drinkers, for obvious reasons. The king paid him 100 ducats for this. Now this is a very interesting painting. As you can see, Bacchus is slightly, he's painted Bacchus as a slightly androgynous figure, I think, but these characters on the right of the painting, representing the drinkers, I mean, he's obviously used locals as his models, and they've got wonderful expressions on their faces. This chap in the middle here, really cheeky. I mean, he's full of mischief, isn't he? What he wouldn't do to get his own way. And this man just leaning over his shoulder, he's also full of mischief, I would say. A very expressive face here, this man as well. And these two are in conversation on the extreme right. They're in some sort of conversation. The poses are a little bit hammy, I think, melodramatic maybe. I don't know what you think about that. This character here is being crowned with a laurel leaf by Bacchus, so he's presumably being welcomed into the party of drinkers. But it's full of life, this painting. It's full of color, it's full of life. The background is fairly light as well. It's a vague, there's no detail in the background really, apart from this tree. But it's full of life, and I think myself personally, it hangs on this duo here, shall we say. These two, they're really well into their third or fourth round of drinks, I would say, and they're up for anything. In the same year, with the king's permission, he set out for Venice and Rome to acquaint himself with Renaissance art. Velazquez lived in the Vatican for almost a year, and while there he painted this painting, Apollo in the Forge of Vulcan. Apollo is telling Vulcan that his wife, Venus, is having an affair with Mars, to the astonishment of his fellow blacksmiths. Having seen the work of his contemporaries in Italy, his palette has now become richer and his paintings more colourful and his brushwork freer. Now again, we've got Apollo here, who doesn't particularly strike me as being an Apollo-like figure, slightly effeminate again, and the blacksmiths too, a bit on the scrawny side, I would say, but it's a well composed painting. Apollo takes center stage, even though he's on the extreme left of the painting, and the smiths here are, well, you can see by their expressions on their faces, they're amazed at this story that is being told about Vulcan. This character is Vulcan, I'm pretty sure. So again, a bit something similar to the bodygun style of painting, in so much as we've got the utensils and the tools, anvil there, of course, and the hammers, and the man on the extreme right, he's doing something with what looks like armor, I would imagine, which of course would be what they would mostly be producing, I dare say. He also painted in that year Joseph's bloody coat brought to Jacob, which is in the Escorial Palace. Not quite such a convincing painting, I don't think. We've got Jacob here, again, is very melodramatic gestures, a very posed attitude, being surprised by what he's been told by the three sons on the extreme right here, left here, and the clothes strangely don't particularly look as though they're covered with blood, which they're supposed to be. And then we've got these two other brothers who obviously they look guilty, don't they? They know that the whole thing is a ruse, and that Joseph has been thrown down a pit. So they definitely looking guilty and wondering how. And they're in the background, of course. Who's barking at these brothers, and so he's It's almost as though he doesn't trust anything they're saying, and they mustn't come too near to Joseph. In 1635, Velazquez painted a court jester, Pablo de Valladolid. I think I pronounced that correctly. So he painted a lot of jesters and dwarfs, palace dwarfs, as you will see in the course of his life. I think this is a full grown. I don't think this man is other than sort of 5'5" or 6", I would think. But again, his gestures are slightly hammy. He probably would have been an actor anyway. And a very expressive face again. And we've got the dark, and we got the light background, because of course he's been painted in dark clothes. By the end of the following year, he completed a very large canvas, The Surrender of Breda. This painting advanced his reputation in the palace. In it, we see the Spanish general receiving the keys of the city of Nassau. Smoke rises from the city of Breda in the background there. X-rays reveal that the Dutch on the left of the painting here have actually been painted over a group of seated figures to balance the composition better. So presumably an afterthought by Velazquez. So there's a lot going on in this painting. It's a very large painting, 120, well, 4 foot by 5 or 6 foot, something like that. It's quite a large painting anyway. And it's curious, so all these spears, they don't necessarily unbalance. You think they'd unbalance the painting. There's nothing comparable on the other side, on the left-hand side, but they don't seem to do that. And we've got the rear end of the horse here. Velazquez's decision to, he seemed to like to paint rear ends of people and horses and things, and as we shall see again, for whatever reason. If we move to the royal portraits, this portrait is of Prince Balthazar. I think we would say Balthazar, but Balthazar Carlos on horseback, the heir apparent. And you can see that he's fresh-faced young prince. His clothes are beautifully painted and full of richness and rich material, and the horse is very lively. Velazquez is not so interested in the background. He's just painted a general landscape in the background of mountains and sky, and the forest is rather crudely painted, I think. So his main interest is obviously the portrait of the young prince. He'd already painted Prince Balthazar with his dwarf. And there he is. This is the dwarf, clearly, and that's the prince holding center stage. And again, although he's very, very young, his costume is very richly embroidered, as befits the heir apparent of a vast empire. And here he is again, painted a few years later. This painting is in London, in the Wallace collection, Manchester Square. Actually, if you get to London, you can go and see it there. And again, it's the same sort of pose. He's pointing, he's looking towards his right, our left, and his clothes, as befits the heir apparent or a royal personage, very rich indeed. The prince was heir apparent, but he never inherited. He died at the age of 16. And this we'll find out later, will have quite a bearing on the Velazquez's most famous painting, Las Medias. The painting of his father, King Philip IV, in brown and silver, was painted in 1635, around the same time. Now, this is a very interesting painting. It's over 6 foot by 4 foot. And to appreciate it, it's said, and I think it's true, you have to stand quite well away from it, because the nearer you get to it, you realize how he's created all this elaborate pattern work on the clothes that he's wearing. And basically, as you can see, it's almost an impressionist. Although the impressionists, of course, come many years later. But it's basically just, I shouldn't use the word just, but it's dabs of white and grey over brown. And it's said that he painted this painting with a very, very long brush, so that he could stand back from it and create the effect. So it works very well at a distance, but the closer you get to it, you do see that there's not a great deal of elaborate detail work there. It's created for effect, but it works very well. I think you will agree. It does work very well. In the years 1632 to 36, he painted the royal hunting portraits destined for the king's hunting lodge. Now, this portrait is the king's brother, the Cardinal Infante Fernando. And you notice again the typical Habsburg features, the prominent chin and the thick lips, the large nose and the heavy-lidded eyes. And the prince is painted, it's a large painting again, 6 foot by 4 foot basically. And he's painted with his trusty dog there, a retriever dog, I suppose. And then also he painted Prince Balthazar again, the heir apparent. Now, the prince's dog here, or one of his dogs, has gone to sleep on the job, it seems to me. So he's probably waiting for something to happen. And then we've got a cropped dog on the extreme right, looking particularly alert, but what we can see of him. That gun, I'm sure that gun would never fire a bullet. It's far too small, but it fits in very well with the scale of the painting. In 1644, the king put an end to a war in Catalonia and asked Velazquez to paint this work to commemorate it. Another portrait, King Philip in Fraga. This painting is in the Frick collection in New York. And the king is painted basically in red here. Huge hat there, which we only see the inside of the hat. Not sure what he's holding in his hand, but I think the red and the white and silver work extremely well. And of course, the instantly recognizable face of the king is inevitably aging now. And this became a bone of contention with the king later. He also painted at this time this brilliant painting of the favorite court jester, Sebastian de Mora. Velazquez painted all the court dwarfs and jesters at one time or another, but he painted them all with great sympathy and respect. Again, a very expressive face, an honest face, I would say, full of hard work and sincerity. And he's sat him down, and I don't know why he's painted him sat down, but it's slightly comical. But then again, he would be that would be part of his job, I suppose, to entertain the children of the family. But painting him like that, with you can't see any fingers. His fists are clenched, and the shoes sitting out is just it's just comical, but that all sort of contrasts with this very serious face, intelligent eyes, I would say. And then we've got the green and the red, which is always a good combination. This is another jester, Don Diego de Acedo. He's also known as El Primo for whatever reason. And Velazquez has painted him with books. We might say these are huge books, but they might not be so big as we think, because they certainly give the impression of this being a diminutive jester. So not quite such an impressive painting, I don't think, but still. I'll leave it there for you to have a look at for a moment. Velazquez had already proved himself originally in the portrayal of mythological characters, i.e. the Triumph of Bacchus, which we've already seen. And this one is of Mars, possibly painted with his tongue in his cheek. He seems to have used a world-weary middle-aged peasant as his model. And what the result of that is a strangely down at heel, unthreatening god of war. Now, the only thing that tells us that this is a god of war is the helmet, of course. And at the very bottom there, he's taken all his, there's a shield, and he's taken off his armor. But apart from that, he looks quite vulnerable to me. Certainly not threatening in any shape or form. And the face and features are painted very darkly, as you can see. So again, a largish 6 foot tall painting. I'll leave you to make up your own mind about Velazquez's God of War. Most of Velazquez's religious paintings were done in the early years, as I said before. But in 1641, he did paint St. Anthony and St. Paul the Hermit. Rather somber painting. These are sort of great blues dominate the overall effect, I think. And we've got a raven here bringing food to St. Paul the Hermit. Manna from heaven, I'm guessing. And also this more successful painting, to my eye, the Coronation of the Virgin. Now, its composition is based on the classic triangle, but inverted, as you can see. And he's done that, it seems, to art critics, to ape the shape of the heart, both in colour and as well as shape. So if I just draw my cursor around like that, you can see how the heart is delineated, and then of course we've got that sweep in there. A very young face for the Virgin, probably inevitably a local peasant girl, probably, or we don't know who the model is, but it's a very young face indeed, and a simple face as well, and not idealized, I would say. But I think the mulberry colors of the who was God and Jesus, isn't it? Their clothes works very well, and again, as I said, apes the color or reminds us of a heart. So I think that's quite a successful. I think it's a very successful painting, fair play. In 1643, Velazquez was appointed assistant to the superintendent of the palace, an important post which involved acquiring artworks for the Alcazar. I think we should remind ourselves that Velazquez is from, his father was a lawyer, so he's not from noble stock at all, and that's definitely told against him as he tried to advance himself in the court. To this end, he returned to Italy in 1649. He was here in 1650 when he produced one of his most significant portraits, that of Pope Innocent X. And not surprisingly, this is still in Rome. This painting is still in Rome. The Pope, we're told, was reluctant to sit at first, and the portrait was kept back from private display for many years. It's a wonderful face, again, highly intelligent eyes, shrewd, and perhaps a little distrustful, a little Machiavellian, I would say. There are all sorts of schemes going on behind those eyes, I think. But it's a wonderful face. And he's captured the sheen on this sateen or velvet cape that the Pope is wearing. And there's some wonderful work as well on the gilded work on the chair behind. Francis Bacon was so impressed with this painting, that it spawned a series of distorted variants in the 1950s and 60s, of which I'm sure you're all very well aware. In fact, more than 45, and these became known as the Screaming Popes. Now, I don't pretend to understand what Francis Bacon is hoping to achieve, or hoped to achieve, with these paintings, but they were all based on Velazquez's painting on the left. The same pose, exactly. And I've just produced this one here just to make the comparison. But I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Screaming Popes. One of his finest female portraits was the lady with the fan. This is in the Wallace collection in London as well. The lady is as yet unidentified, so it might just have been a model that he was using at the time. And it's curious, the colours are quite somber, but they seem to work very well. They're browns and various shades. Lilac, subtle lilac rosette here, and the white gloves, of course, and the skin is painted very delicately. And she's got a very thoughtful, pleasant face, I think. Not a particularly big painting, 3 foot by just over 2 foot. His slave, Juan de Pareja, later an artist in his own right after Velazquez died, had accompanied to Velazquez on his second trip to Italy, and he painted this portrait of him, currently in the Met Museum in New York. And we're told he eventually gave his servant his freedom. What's curious about this is that despite the fact that he was a slave, he was Velazquez's slave, or maybe veering towards servant status, I suppose. He's painted him as though he's a proud nobleman. Very proud face there. Paint me if you dare, I think that look is saying. Or I'm so proud to be painted, maybe, I don't know. But it's a very proud, commanding face. And it was very successful, received an awful lot of praise. Summoned by the king back to Madrid, Velazquez brought back with him 2 small landscapes. They are precise renderings of a particular locality and at a particular time of day, midday on the left and evening on the right. And this one on the left certainly can be identified as precise and accurate. It was also a second point to look at. Quite subdued colours, the greens and the creams and the blues. So now we come to one of Velazquez's most famous paintings, the Rokeby Venus. It's the only surviving Velazquez nude, mainly because the Spanish Inquisition didn't care for them, not unsurprisingly. and may owe a debt to the recumbent Titian Venus and the Giorgione Venus, though neither are painted looking into a mirror. The painting, originating from Rockerby Park in Yorkshire, was famously damaged in 1914 when acquired by the National Gallery, damaged by the suffragette Mary Richardson, and had to be extensively repaired. The creamy luminescent flesh colour contrasts with the black silk she is lying on and the sombre tones of the background. Courtesans were known to favour black bed linen. So what does this say about Venus? Anyway, Velazquez has chosen to paint her as opposed to, as I've said, the Titian and Giorgione's, and also later, of course, Olympia, painted by Manet, from the rear. And we only get to see her face as a reflection in the mirror. Quite why he's chosen to do that, I don't know. But you've got a beautiful line to this Venus. If you look at her hips, I don't want to get too anatomical about this, but her hips with this buttock is almost a perfect circle. And there's a beautiful sweep of line down into her waist there. So she's accentuates what is obviously an hourglass figure. And as I said, the creaminess of the flesh color works extremely well, contrasted with this dark, velvety top sheet that she's leaning on. So this painting is nearly 6 foot long by 4 foot. It's in the National Gallery, so many of you no doubt are familiar with it. And we know this is Venus because this is clearly Cupid, her son, kneeling alongside her and holding the mirror so that she can look at herself. In the following years, he painted, In the following years, he painted the last painting of Philip IV because the king was reluctant to see himself grow old. So obviously he said, this is it, Velazquez, this is the last time you get me to sit for you. I don't want to see myself growing old in your paintings. And it was also the time when he was painting the royal children. This painting of the Infanta Maria Theresa, age 14. This painting is in Vienna. The king's daughter, she's the king's daughter by his first marriage. And the Infanta went on to marry Louis XIV and become the Queen of France. So she was destined for greatness. And look, and we stand back in awe of the dress that she's wearing, this huge farthingale, I think it's called, and all the ornamentation and the filigree around the neck. She's not very typical Habsburg features, and one has to say not particularly prepossessing. I'm guessing this is a wig that she's wearing, but maybe somebody has done an elaborate job on her own hair. But it's quite a startling portrait, I think. We don't know whether she was pleased with it or not. And then we come to the Infanta Margarita, who was the heir apparent once her elder brother had died. And he painted her 6 years later in blue. I'll just let you look at that first of all before we go on, because again, look at the costume. Tremendous amount of work gone into this costume, and it looks heavy too for a small child, a small face there and the small hands, and this looks really, really heavy and stiff. But it just accentuates her royalness, her regality, I suppose, her regalness. And again, we got the dark background with very just drapes, really. Not any particular detail. I know we got some flowers there, but the costume that she's wearing, of course, is brightly lit so that she's absolutely, literally outstanding. And then he's painted her again a few years later in blue. This again is in Vienna. And again, this huge farthingale dress well, built upon around a farthingale. Not quite sure how it works, so I won't say any more about it in case I embarrass myself. But again, typical Habsburg features. Her hair is allowed to flow down towards her shoulders, and the background again rather subdued. Some sort of settle there, maybe, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what she's holding there, but it looks quite like velour, really. They wouldn't have had velour in those days, but it looks quite like fur, I suppose we would say. And as we shall see, she also dominates the masterpiece La Maninas because of the fact she was heir apparent at the time. She was also betrothed and eventually married her uncle, and here we get the inbreeding again, still going on, the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. Then a new heir was born, a boy, and she was no longer heir apparent. And here he is, Prince Philip Prosper. But he died, barely 4 years old. The eventual heir to the throne of Spain was Charles II, but he wasn't born until after Velazquez's death, so Velazquez never got to paint him. There are two great works associated with the final years of the Spanish court. One is the Tapestry Weavers. It's a large painting, and as we saw with the early bodegas, the mythological theme is relegated to the background, and there it is in this alcove, while the weavers are painted large in the foreground. So he's gone back to the old format of the bodegas. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, that seems to be how you pronounce it. So we've got the main thrust of the painting tucked away in this little alcove at the back, and the what's going on there is the goddess Minerva, and this is the goddess Minerva here with the helmet, presumably. She's berating Arachne for her pride in her weaving skills, while three dressed women of the day look on. So there they are, 1, 2, and 3. So they're looking on while this poor old Arachne is getting told off by the goddess Minerva for being too proud of her own work and so on. There's an obvious moral there, isn't there? And then, of course, absolutely oblivious to this scene going on are the actual weavers of this in this room, and they're at various stages of the work. Notice how the spinning wheel is moving so fast we don't see the spokes. Quite a dark painting, really, and we've gone back to the chiaroscuro style in a way, I think, in this one. But it does highlight. I mean, the scene that's going on in this alcove is quite strongly lit, and that's because of these very dark brown umber walls either side of it. The second painting, and most would agree, his most significant and defining work is La Maninas, translated the ladies in waiting. This, not surprisingly, is in the Prado, and it's a large painting, 125 by 119 inches. The painting celebrates a visit to Velazquez's studio by the royal heir, the Infanta Margarita. We've just seen several paintings of hers, with her ladies in waiting, 2 dwarfs, and a pet dog. So there's a lot of figures in this painting. The 2 figures that are not in this painting, curiously enough, are the king and queen, and they're caught in this reflection, in this mirror here in the background, because what's going on here is that, as if you didn't know, is that Velazquez there is painting them on this very large canvas here, And he's looking straight at them, of course, because he's got to paint them, hasn't he? Then we've got the Margarita there in the center, the very center, holding court there, literally holding court. Her two servants either side of her, the dog, rather disgruntled looking dog there, and then these two dwarfs who would accompany them. These are attendants in the background here, and we've got some court official either coming in or strikes me that he's actually going out. So it's a complex composition. The group are watching the king and queen reflected in the mirror, as I say, posing for the portrait. The two sitters are represented only by their reflections. The dominant group is made of the minor court personalities, and the figure of the painter is given as much prominence as anyone to the painting. Now, an X-ray of this painting has revealed that the figure of Velazquez was added later, so he wasn't in the original painting. He's painted himself over a servant. There was a servant standing there originally, and the reason behind that is thought to be that the original commission, or the original idea behind this painting, was that Margarita, who holds center stage, was the heir apparent when the painting was first devised and painted. But then, of course, as we heard, she had a brother who was born, and he immediately became heir apparent. So she's no longer heir apparent. And it's thought that that's the reason that Velazquez altered the emphasis of the painting, I think, by painting himself in. Now, whether that holds water or not, I don't know. But that is one possible explanation as to why Velazquez is only in the painting 3 years after it was originally painted. It is a painting about a painting, and also that of a relaxed daily court life. If you see the cross on Velazquez's, the red cross on his vest, this relates to the knighthood he so wished for almost his entire court life. It signifies the honorary cross of St. James of the Order of Santiago, and was later added to the breast of the painter as it appears today. So originally it wasn't there because he hadn't been awarded the title. But some said that the king himself painted it in, but I don't know whether that's true or not, but that has been said. But he didn't receive the honor until 3 years after he had completed La Meninas. And then when I say completed it, I mean completed it with himself painted in. So we've got an excellent, it's an excellent detail, really, of all the characters in this painting. I'll just flick back, if I can, to the original painting. So there we are again, you can see. And it's an extraordinary painting, isn't it? The idea that the king and queen are just mere reflections in this painting, because she, Margarita, was the original point of the painting. And then suddenly she wasn't, because her brother was born, and then 16 years later her brother dies, and again she becomes the heir apparent, although at a later age, obviously, and then she no longer the heir apparent when the Charles II is born, a later brother, but Velazquez, as I said, is by this time dead. In 1660, Velazquez was taken ill at the palace, exhausted by his duties, and he died at home. His widow survived him by only a week. Of their private life together, very little is recorded. The post-mortem inventories show he died as a man of property. His large house contained many expensive pieces of furniture, many tapestries, and a very good library. As a painter, however, he was never prolific. There are only 110 or 120 known canvases which have survived him, and most escaped being stolen by the French during the Peninsular War. He and his wife were buried in the church of San Juan Bautista, but because the church was destroyed by the French in the Peninsular War, the precise whereabouts of his grave is unknown. Velazquez once said, "I would rather be the first painter in common things than second in higher art." And Picasso, visiting the Prado many times, sketched many of his paintings. But I think we will end this talk with Manet's verdict on Velazquez, and Manet was extremely influenced by Velazquez when he visited the Prado. Manet called him the painter of painters.